In this video, we're going to talk about solids and the way that solids are arranged at a molecular level. So some solids are what we call amorphous solids, meaning that their organization at an atomic level is very disordered. They have a lot of disorder in their structure, and it's kind of just random how their atoms and ions are arranged. Crystalline solids, on the other hand, have a highly regular arrangement. They're ordered in a very specific arrangement, and there are certain types of arrangements that are very common, and we're going to talk about those arrangements. So there's a couple of ways that we categorize the arrangements of crystalline solids. The lattice is the three-dimensional system of the components that make up the substance. But within that lattice, within that three-dimensional system, we have a unit cell, and the unit cell is the smallest repeating unit of that lattice. So if you look, for example, at the illustration down here, this larger structure is a lattice. So if you notice within this lattice, there are cubes. One of these individual cubes is a unit cell. So this lattice has multiple unit cells that make up the entire structure. There are different ways that unit cells can be arranged, and we're going to talk about three of the main ones here, and then we're going to talk about some variations within those main three unit cells. So one of the types of unit cells is a simple cubic unit cell. The simple cubic unit cell has ions or spheres at each corner. So the spheres here represent different ions. So each one of these corners, you will see a sphere. And if you have a lattice made up of that unit cell, each one of the corners is a different ion, or they will repeat in some pattern. The body-centered cubic is similar to the simple cubic in that it has spheres on each corner, but there's also a sphere right in the center of this unit cell. So we have a sphere that wasn't there on the simple cubic. So we have this one additional sphere in the middle. A face-centered cubic has quite a few more spheres on it. It still has the spheres at the corners of each of the cube, but there's also a sphere on the face of each of the cubes. So we have one sphere in the center of each of those faces. So you can see, if you look at the lattice, there's a lot more spheres, and those spheres represent ions. So we have a lot more ions that fit into the face-centered cubic than we do on the simple cubic. This here is a three-dimensional representation of those unit cells. So if you could look at just one of the unit cells, so we've cut this off at the corners, so you can see one of the corners here. So we have one ion at each corner of this simple cubic unit cell. When we have a body-centered cubic, now you can see one whole sphere in the center of this unit cell. And on the face-centered cubic, you can see the three-dimensional ion or sphere here on each one of the faces. So if we start with the simple cubic, if we look at just one of the spheres, that sphere connects to 6 other spheres. There's one that's right up above it in the next unit cell up. there's one that's right beside it in the next unit cell over. There's one right below it in the next unit cell down. And then it's connected to 3 of the spheres in its own unit cell. So it's directly connected to 6 other spheres. So because of that, we say that a sphere in a simple cubic lattice has a coordination number of 6. If we take a body-centered cubic, if we look at the atom in the center, it touches the 4 spheres above it, and it also touches the 4 spheres below it. So it's touching a total of 8 other spheres, which means that a body-centered cubic unit cell has a coordination number of 8. So 4 on the top plus 4 on the bottom gives us a coordination number of 8. Now for our body-centered cubic and our face-centered cubic models, there are different ways that we can arrange those atoms or ions in our unit cell. So we typically arrange them in what we call a closest packing model. So in the closest packing model, we pack things, we layer things in a way that uses up the available space. So there's 2 types of arrangements that we use. One is the ABA arrangement, and one is the ABC arrangement. So let's look at how these are structured. In the ABA arrangement, you'll notice the first and third letters are the same. The reason for that is that every third layer in the ABA arrangement lies directly over the first layer. So we start with the first layer, which is our yellow layer here, which is A. And then we have our second layer that's slightly offset from that. And then our third layer lies directly over that first layer. So those line up. And then our B layer lines up exactly with the B layer that we had. So we have an alternating arrangement so that every other layer lines up with the layer 2 layers below it. We call this structure a hexagonal closest packing structure. So we get kind of a hexagon in this unit cell, and these hexagons, every other one, lines up with each other. So if you looked at this one layer at a time, we start with the first layer, and we're only showing part of the second layer here. So now this part of the second layer lies right in between this first layer, and then we put another layer that's exactly like the first layer on the top. So this is what the unit cell would look like. So for example, if we look at the center atom in this middle layer, it has 6 other atoms that go around it. Then it touches 3 atoms in the layer on top and 3 atoms in the layer on the bottom. So it ends up with 12 neighbors that it's touching. In the ABC arrangement, the layers that are in the third layer do not lie directly over the ones in the first layer. We actually have to get several layers in before we get any that are directly over top of each other. So we have an A layer, and then we have a B layer that's slightly offset, and then we have a C layer, And then, when we get to the repeating arrangement, we're 4 layers in before we get to one that repeats the first layer. Then we have the B layer that repeats the B layer from before. So we take 3 layers that are offset from each other and we keep repeating that. So we call this the cubic closest packing structure. If we look at this in a 1 layer at a time illustration. So if we take our first layer and we're just showing what's in one unit cell. So then we have our B layer. So these are the cells that would go over the first layer. And then we can add our next layer. So part of this is going to overlap, but not the whole thing. And then we end up with another one from our first layer. So an atom in every 4th layer is over the atom from the first layer. So we get a unit cell that looks something like this. And this is more of a 3-dimensional view of that. So if we look at how many spheres are actually in a unit cell, because you will notice when we look at these 3-dimensional structures, we don't have whole spheres in each of these corners, because this whole sphere is actually part of all of these unit cells that surround it. So we actually only have a piece of that unit cell there. And on the faces, the other half of this face is not showing as a part of the next unit cell. So the way that these are packed together, we end up with only 1/8 of a cell on the corner. On the corner here. So if we count it up, we have 8 corners in any given cube, and we have 1/8 of a cell. So if we take 8 times 1/8, and then we have 6 faces on the cube, and each of those has a half of a sphere. So 8 times 1/8 plus 6 times 1/2 gives us a total of 4 spheres that actually lie within this unit cell. And we can do a similar calculation for any of the unit cells that we have. So we're going to get some more practice with this in class. We'll go through some different unit cells and look at how they're made up. So I will see you in class.